if you really didn't know what was going on and you walked into this room today, you just think that this was a conference about Google bashing, which is very unfair. I've never bashed Google in my life. I've been a big supporter of Google for the better part of a decade, just when people know that.
I can absolutely attest to that. You're their biggest fanboy.
Huge, huge. Andrew, thank you very much for doing this. By the way, Andrew Casale is flown in this morning, is that right, Andrew? Red-eye.
Red-eyed in.
Yeah, he was on the stand yesterday.
Monday.
Yeah, you were on the stand.
Monday.
Oh, Monday, sorry. He was on the stand Monday in the DOJ case, which is very exciting. Like, we've got two people here today. I think Andrew obviously is here this morning, and then James Avery will be here this afternoon. He was on the he was on the stand on Monday as well. Just, what was it like? I've seen, you've actually painted the scene. It's a kind of old courthouse in, like, deepest, darkest North Carolina. Like, so I'm thinking it's a bit like Matlock. Matlock. Remember that old guy with the southern drawl, and he was like, he went bumbling, and he was a bit of an idiot from the outside, but really he was a genius, and he got the guys in the trial. Was it a bit like that?
Well, I can try to paint the picture. The magnitude was definitely evident as soon as I got there. So just to kind of maybe paint it quickly. Courthouse had a gigantic line down the street, which was just interesting. How many people showed up?
All AdTech people.
I don't know who was really there. There was an actual media scrum. So I think tons of camera people, video people, reporters, lights. And upon getting into the courtroom was full. The courtroom across the hall was also full for overflow. And so every time there was a break, it was an absolute madhouse. So you definitely very quickly felt the magnitude of what was happening just upon showing up. Every time we'd leave the courtroom, all the camera people would follow us around and take photos. Like, it was like, for something, me personally, I've never experienced anything quite like this before. It was definitely a unique experience.
Yeah, I know you can't talk too much about it, but like, what do you think the consequences of this trial would be, the implications for the sell side, for instance? What do you think will likely happen? I mean, I think people underestimate how significant this trial is to the ecosystem. It's becoming a long time, but what do you think the sort of consequences will be for the space?
I certainly can't speculate on what will happen with the trial. What I can say is, the trial is going to go in one of two directions. It's certainly evident, it's abundantly clear that the DOJ is arguing that open web display is a market, and if they're successful in that argument, we are likely going to see some action. Google is arguing that digital advertising is an enormous market, is highly competitive, of which there are massive players, including Amazon and Facebook and the like. So I think fundamentally it's going to be a question of whether open web display is deemed to be a market. If the answer to that question is yes, I think we're going to see some pretty massive change, which will be open season for innovation. The chaos and disruption answer on the survey before isn't wrong. It will absolutely open everything up, but I think that's also probably appropriate to the internet, and one of the things that makes it so great.
Yeah, I'll speculate if you can't. I am putting serious money on a breakup, and Google are going to move ahead. Apparently, there's an announcement tomorrow, a significant announcement. I've heard two things that are quite interesting. One, actually, two DSP leaders who've never heard from the AdX team for the better part of their career, in the last 3 months started getting inundated with emails, right? Completely hammered by them. This is insane, right? The other is, I just heard from two people in the last couple of days that Google is going to make open bidding free so that they can basically give publishers the option of pulling the code off page. And that would suggest to me that, just looking, that's kind of the levels of insanity, because they're just being like taken over the coals on anti-competitive behavior. But at the same time, they're offering a service that could kill off pre-bid and all the tags on page, basically. So I think there's going to be Google's going to preempt this. I think they're going to go, listen, here's the breakup. We're going to do this, and it feels to me that AdX and GAM would be the likely one to be spun off, but I don't think that would be enough for the DOJ. I think they're going to go further.
I cannot speculate.
Come on,
I like your smile there. What I will say is I haven't heard those Google changes, but look, there's that sounds like some 3D chess is going on. Open bidding should have been free the whole way. From back in the exchange bidding days, it should never have come with a fee. So if that change is being made, that's great. It's probably 8 years late, but beyond that,
Right. Okay, well, enough of the DOJ because you can only say so much. Okay, well, let's talk about some of the significant changes on the sell side, right? Curation has been bubbling up over the last. We've got a panel on it later in the morning, but I want to get the index take on this because it does have a significant impact on the sell side, right? I mean, for many, many years, SSPs have been derided as dumb pipes, right? I remember people telling me that SSPs are dumb pipes. They're the utility sort of like, done. But that seems to have changed. Well, it never was the case, but it seemed that attitude has suddenly changed in the last sort of 24 months, particularly with the rise of curation. I want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing from an index point of view. So curation isn't new. We've been using PMPs to sort of transact media in programmatic for many, many years. But the new sort of like PMP Plus, the sort of this ability to do sort of real granular curation and building deals, is going to change the landscape in some shape. And I want to get the index point of view of that and how you guys are approaching it.
Yeah, like I would say I have a slightly different take, which is that like the SSP is a plumbing piping company. So you can call us dumb pipes. You can say all we do is run an auction. All of that's a fair comment. It's fair commentary. The thing is, we have scaled those pipes and that infrastructure so significantly now. Rarely is there a website on the internet, in app, or in streaming that we're not connected to. And so what I think is really unique and novel about curation, and I think this has been born out of frustration, is an example that innovation finds a way. In this marketplace, for far too long, most of the value creation was pretty much exclusively centered around what the DSP was doing. The DSP layers on the data, they drive outcomes, they optimize, they add the creative, they add every tag, they help with measurement. The DSP did everything, and that's great, and that got us here. And the SSP was derided with commentary like that. But the whole way, we were integrating those pipes deeper and deeper and deeper into the foundation of this market. I think what curation has unearthed is that we can now build value on top of that infrastructure. We can now build value on top of that plumbing. And that value can actually help ignite new innovation. Because if all the innovation happens strictly inside of the DSP, it means it's buried behind the roadmap of a DSP. And while I don't have the business challenge of having to get my unique product into the roadmap of DV3 or Amazon's DSP or even Jeff's DSP, I don't envy anybody who has had their value blocked by the roadmap of a DSP. That can now shift to the sell side, and we can help ignite innovation that wasn't necessarily happening rapidly. That's what's happening fundamentally with curation. And so I wouldn't say it's necessarily that the SSP is transcending from the stigma of being piping or plumbing or even dumb pipes. I think it's correct that we be infrastructure. I think that's good because I think at the end of it all, we are exchanges. We are not supposed to be taking all the credit. But what's really happening is we're igniting a new wave of innovation that was maybe stuck or stunted with the prior paradigm. And
Rachel showed the sketch of the ad tech middle. I shared that with you. And we were trying to define this because curation feels to me like an abstract term in some, but like you're talking about, there's a bigger trend going on about new companies coming into space, some algo-based companies, curation, sales houses, and that the value is moving from the execution layer to that middle. And it means that you're unleashing sort of like more working media, more margin for these players. And it's hard to define, but like people will say, well, hasn't that always been the case? Well, not necessarily, because as to your point, like if a DSP is doing all the work, where is the value added from the companies down the line, right? You're plugging into a DV360 or a trade desk. Effectively, you're in their marketplace, but our algorithm is sort of optimizing media rather than you having an effect on the actual campaign KPIs. So let's talk about that middle. I want to talk about that because it's really important. Like, where do you see these companies coming from? Because you talk about brand new companies. You've seen this huge shift, and I don't think people are seeing in the market that there is a shift happening right now.
Yeah, it's been blowing our minds how quickly things are shifting, and that's from the position. And I really don't tend to be hyperbolic in my statements. I've been in this market my entire life. All I can remember as a young person was ad tech, so I've really been in this market.
You were like 12-year-old when
Pretty
you started
much.
your first ad
Yeah,
network. That's actually
literally, it's a fact.
Yeah.
If I compare what's happening here to the rise of programmatic in 2009, 2010, and even in the header bidding era, which is a big subject of the trial that's happening right now, 2014, 15, what I think a lot of people miss is that at the beginning of a shift in a trend, there is a relatively insignificant volume of media transacted. There's a relatively insignificant volume of business movement because it takes a while for a trend to set. What's really surprising us is how rapidly we're seeing real dollars pointed toward curation, or this general category of new value creation. It's happening very fast, much faster than header bidding. It took us about 2 years to get header bidding integrations with publishers from a few dollars a day to something significant. Like, there's a whole part of the history that is just not appreciated for how long it took to just figure it all out, make it simple, make it scalable, get people adopting it. We're skipping a lot of those steps here, and I think it's because we've effectively punched a hole into the transaction, and we've said, you now have a choice. The thing is, in no way does this trend necessitate moving value off of the DSP. It's not something that we advocate for. It's not something that we're in any way espousing in market. I think in a lot of cases, DSPs do an incredible job of what they do to drive outcomes for the customer. We're just giving companies a choice to add their value on the sell side potentially a lot faster because it works on every DSP and they don't have to be buried in roadmap. And that one choice is now igniting multiple categories of company that are rethinking the way they integrate. So for us, when we launched our platform, we call it Marketplaces, earlier this year, our primary focus was supporting the curation category, retail media, as well as the agency networks that also have launched their own marketplaces. But since the launch, we've probably got close to a dozen new categories of companies that are also launching using the exact same platform, whether it be companies with attention metrics, companies with creative products that were buried in DSP roadmap, all kinds of data companies. And then a really exciting new category of company is the algorithmic space. So these are companies that are saying, historically, the DSP's algorithm was the only way to drive performance and outcomes. Who's to say it's working optimally? What if I have my own data science team? What if I want to create my own model to drive outcomes?
You talk about the likes of Chalice and 59A and all those type of businesses.
Exactly, whether it be Chalice, Cognitive, there's about a half dozen of these companies now that are spawning, and they're working really closely with their clients. They're gaining access to all the media spend that the marketers that are using their platforms have available, conversion data, data science efforts to try to design their own custom-tailored models for the marketer. And what's really cool is if you go back to the dumb pipe parallel of the supply side, we have a lot of infrastructure, we have a lot of pipes. It just so happens that we also have a lot of compute. Index is as much an SSP as we are a gigantic globally scaled computer. And if you have a model, Ciarán, one day, and you want to send us your model, we can actually run it across the entire internet. I can't wait to see your model because I'm sure it'll be very well tailored. But this is what I mean by it's almost taking on a new life of its own rapidly, far beyond where it started. And this to me does feel like the beginning of a shift, much like header before it, much like programmatic before it. Just if anything, a bit faster than I've seen in the prior two cycles.
Well, I'm going to throw a grenade into this because the first thing people are going to ask is like, oh, another layer of ad tech. That's just more margin from my pocket. Like, you're like, what the hell? So I'm paying 20% to a DSP to run a deal ID. I'm paying 15 to 20% for the SSP, and then I'm paying another 6-7%. Now, I totally agree with you around value creation, new types of companies. I'm seeing it all the time, right? It's what I call sort of signal-based ad tech, right? You look at DV, for instance. I don't think it's a brand safety company anymore. It's a signal-based company, right? So brand safety, attention, all these different sort of signals are there, but that's valued, right? The problem is, how do you convince a brand or an agency to invest in that when they have to take another bunch of margin out of working media? So my question to you is, do you think that, and the two little dots, which was the SSP and DSP, was deliberately small, because do you think that price compression on the execution layer is inevitable? And like you talked about, like pipes, right? So utility companies are generally scaled to take a tiny percentage, but obviously in aggregate, that's a huge business. Do you think price compression is inevitable on those markets? Because I just don't think the take rate is sustainable, especially for the growth of curation.
Yeah, like I think I want to take this in two parts. So I want to answer the question, but I want to answer it second. The first thing that I want to say is I think there's a little bit of healthy ignorance today to just how much margin is already flowing through bids. So I think but I think some people will look at a transaction and say, okay, there's a DSP placing a bid on behalf of the SSP and it runs on the pub. And so, the DSP takes their fee, whatever it is, maybe it's 15, 20 points. The SSP takes their fee, maybe it's 10 to 15 points. Look at that margin, 60 cents on the dollar gets to the publisher. What I think is missed, though, is if you actually study the seat placing the bid, in not every case are you getting the pure media from the seat holder. There's quite a few managed media businesses that hold seats at DSPs that have also already taken a fee. And nothing caps that fee today. So that fee might be 7 points, it might be 20 points, it might be 99 points. And so the one thing that I would say with respect to curation, and I've heard this commentary on a new fee, I think what's being missed is that the fee is already there in many cases. It's just supremely obfuscated. And I think if anything, curation by creating a new box is going to make it a lot easier to see it, discover it, and control it. Publishers have full control over the way they would manage any demand through marketplaces, the platform that I mentioned, or any of our other SSP competitors in a way that you didn't have before because you didn't actually know how the bid price was constructed once it left the DSP. So I just want to make that point because it's not like this is a new fee that's come out of nowhere. I'm pretty sure this fee is already in play in a lot of cases. It's just completely opaque, buried behind the bid. To your ultimate point, though, this is one of the reasons why I'm okay with my category being looked at as infrastructure, pipes. Call us dumb pipes, call us whatever you want. We do have hundreds of engineers and big ML investments, but if you want to call us dumb pipes, we're totally fine with that.
Didn't call you dumb
We
pipe,
have no
for
problem with that. We have
Calm
no
down,
problem
Andrew.
with that framing because it's correct in that we are supposed to be merely infrastructure, and infrastructure is supposed to get out of the way. And so if you look at any real scaled marketplace, the value is supposed to leave the middle and get to the edge. And ad tech has done a lousy job of pulling that value off to this point, which is the value starts on one side of the transaction, gets eaten in the middle, and by the time you get to the other edge of the transaction, a lot of the value is gone. And so we have a long road to go to eventually finish our job as a category on the supply side, DSP tech as well, to get to a true level of efficiency that I do believe is completely feasible, where we are now seeing consolidation actually happen. And in a consolidated market, economies of scale come forward. I also don't think it's well understood that the business model of the exchange largely tethers costs to the act of running the auction. So today we run 450 billion auctions. It's a big number, who cares? But the fact is our cost is connected to the act of running the auction. If today we clear 2 billion auctions, and tomorrow we clear 4 billion auctions, the incremental increase of cost is 0. So as consolidation takes root, our ability to drive our costs down and better commercials becomes more and more realistic, and that's also happening. And so I think to your ultimate point, I think there's probably 2 milestones to come. The first is we are going to have to get to a point where we're single-digit ad tech takes, and I think we're not far from that even as a company. So get somewhere near Visa first. Then eventually we have to get closer to finance. And in finance, if you buy a share of Apple today, you don't think for a second the absolute tiny nominal percentage of that transaction that went to NASDAQ or NYSE, because those platforms are so efficient, their costs are effectively free. We're nowhere near that yet, but those have to be our yardsticks. And so I think our view as a company is a little different than our competitive set because we openly advocate for the commoditization of infrastructure because it's the only inevitable outcome of all of this. And I think a lot of people are still trying to find ways to defend cost and margin, and I just don't think that's sustainable long term.
And curation potentially accelerates this trend around this price compression. Just moving gears a bit, or I want to talk about CTV, right? Because everybody talks about CTV because it seems to be the only thing AdTech wants to talk about half the time. You can't actually have a proper conversation with Paul Gubbins. He just wants to talk CTV all the time. So it's like, love you, Paul. But we'll talk about indexes strategy, for instance. There'd be a perception that you're late to the party, right? I can't believe I'm saying this is history repeat because I've just said this to Jeff, and I'm always wrong. But like, where does index fit into that sort of narrative? Everybody on the supply side has got a CTV story. So your peer set, the Magnites, the Programmatics of the world, OpenX, they all have some sort of like CTV play. Where does index fit that, and where do you see that trend? Like as a sort of macro question following that, where do you see the CTV trend going from supply side?
Yeah, like I'd say historically, Index has a reputation for being late to every party. It's kind of our thing, but we've learned along the way. People really like the person that brings the beer late to the party, and so that's kind of our thing.
2:00 guy, right? You bring the beer whenever he's run out.
Guilty.
I love that person.
That is definitely our thing. We relate to programmatic. We relate to header bidding. We were certainly a late entrant to streaming. That said, I would characterize the late entrance to streaming 2-3 years ago. It's close to being a quarter of our transaction volume today as a company. It's the fastest growing channel we've ever seen. And there's a reason for the growth that we've seen and the success that we've seen. And it's because if you're going to join a party late, you have to add value. Otherwise, you're not interesting. 3-4 years ago, as we were looking at entering the space, you're talking to the biggest broadcasters, you're talking to the OEMs, the Samsungs and the LGs, you're talking to the sticks, the Rokus of the world. They were all good. They had well-established platform partners and strategies. They weren't really interested in doing anything that smelled of, diluting the category or diluting their value. And so entrance required a narrative. As we got going, a few players took a bet on us, and we started to integrate into supply, and it became evident that there was a lot of innovation missing in streaming that we thought that we could help with. Specifically, most of the streaming transactions up until just recently were transacted upon the base OpenRTB protocol, which was used to sell banners. And while that protocol is so amazing in its agility to scale this market to tens of billions of dollars, a commercial break is not a banner. A commercial break in a stream is a fixed period of time that is cut multiple ways. If you think of 3 minutes of airtime, you might see 3 60-second ads, you might see 2 30s, or I should say, you might see 6 30s, you might see a combination of 30s, 45s, and 15s. That is not a banner at all. That is selling time, variable time based on duration. And so we thought it was really odd that the way streaming was working when we entered was to just hammer DSPs with bid requests. And so that fixed commercial break was effectively just polluting the bid pipe with so many bid requests. And we were like, there's got to be a better way. And so we collaborated with industry partners in Tech Lab to create OpenRTB 2.6, which basically just brought the pod into streaming so that we can sell time. So today when we send bid requests out now, the bid requests can carry a time duration and say, this is 3 minutes of airtime, and this is how it can be cut by the publisher. That's changing everything because now we're able to radically reduce the volume of bid requests, which is super efficient. A lot of them were being throttled away, and we can monetize better. And it's been a huge part of our success to this point in streaming. And it took us a while to get people comfortable with it, including some of the big incumbents. But just about every platform now has or is adopting OpenRTB 2.6. So I'd say that to say, as usual, we didn't just enter the space late. We entered it with a view of how can we make this better? Is there a problem for us to fix? And we're by no means done in streaming as well. Live has its own host of problems, which we're really sinking our teeth into right now, which is exciting because it means there's a lot more innovation to still come.
And there's this sort of like clash in many ways between buy and sell side in CTV, right? You have companies who build products that were supply side, but now are demand side, and likewise we're demand side. So, it's kind of a broader question about this demarcation piece, right? How do Index has always maintained that they're a supply side business, and to be fair to them, they've never gone down the route of building sort of SPO products that try and go directly to the agencies. So how do you sort of build for that in CTV, which is sort of like we've seen these sort of like one stack solutions effectively. You basically get built straight into the ad server. Like, where do you play in that, or do you think that CTV will naturally have a buy side and a sell side eventually?
Yeah, like there's a few things that I think people are not fully aware of in CTV, which is the market appears from the outside as being not very fragmented, as being very simple, as in there's a small number of major media companies or broadcasters that matter, a couple of TVs, some sticks, and that's it. Why do you need an exchange? Why do you need a marketplace? This is so simple and straightforward. It's very easy to wall off. But as you start to get into the details, it's anything but. For the most part, the ad rights are all governed by something called carriage agreements in CTV, where nobody really has control over anything. For the most part, a broadcaster will have to cut in a distributor. So think of a piece of content on CTV being consumed by a consumer. How are they watching the content? Are they watching it on a Samsung device or an LG device or a Roku stick? Chances are there's probably a carriage agreement between that content owner and that device owner, which means that the inventory already is now fragmented. If you have a fast app in the mix, a Pluto, a Tubi, there's another level of fragmentation there too. Those ad rights can also be handed across to multiple apps, not just a single app. And so as you get deeper and deeper and deeper into streaming, what becomes evident is that there's a lot of complexity here and a lot of fragmentation here that takes on different forms from the web. While the web is great in that it's big, there's millions of websites, for the most part, the telegraph.co.uk or the NewYorkTimes.com control everything. There's no carriage agreement. They own and control all their inventory. In streaming, it's not quite like that. So we see there being a lot of value in connecting to all those touch points to reduce that fragmentation. As to the demarcation point between supply and demand, we feel really confident in our value as being 100% focused on supply, because CTV also has some really challenging burst problems. So
Burst problems.
this is a really unique nuance of the channel. So if you think of the web, or if you even think of app, most consumption is very steady throughout the day. We kind of see peaks and valleys over the working day, shifting from laptops and desktops to phone, but otherwise, like, traffic is pretty steady on the open internet. In streaming, for the most part, you're watching television after work at night. There's bursts, and so it becomes really problematic if you want to reach everything in streaming to be able to handle those bursts. If you think of a live sporting event, that's got 1 million users tuned in. When they go to commercial break, 1 million devices want an ad in that moment. Which is a very different scale problem from anything we've seen before on the open internet.
So just reading between the lines is that there is a huge amount of innovation still to be done in CTV. Like, you talk about live, I never thought about that because it's always video on demand, right?
Yeah.
But like, you're right, more sport. Like, the thing that people gravitate most to is sports, right? Like, I mean, I sat down and watched the Red Zone. I'm NFL fan, but Red Zone on Sunday. I just watched that and go, there's millions of people like me watching this. So like, live sports is going to be things. So your point about the amount of innovation required in CTV is it's only starting effectively.
Yeah, like it is early days, and it is a huge infrastructure problem. So if you think of the reason why bursts matter, if you can't handle the burst, you can't buy the burst. And if you're a DSP, you might only want to buy 1% of the audiences in that burst, but if you have to pay for 99%, it is cost prohibitive. And so if I go back to our value as a supply-side player, one of the biggest values of the exchange that is underappreciated is our ability to optimize a problem like that. Our job is to handle it all. We don't get a throttle index when we work with a publisher. We have to take on all their supply. But what we get to then do is optimize the pipe for each DSP so that they don't have to waste compute trying to buy what they're not interested in buying. And the streaming problem is only going to get bigger. And so it's just like another example of how we are still so early days. There is a whole sea of opportunity still coming. The consumer trend is also very real and is still very early days, but it's going to mean a lot of these gnarly scale infrastructure challenges to come, which, for us is exciting because it's another class of boring problem that the dumb pipes like to solve.
What a way to finish this panel. Andrew, thank you. What a pro as well. 22 seconds left. On that note, I want to thank you, Andrew. We thank you for your service to AdTech, and we thank you for taking the stand against the great evil of our time, Google. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Round of applause.
AdTech bro hug, love it.